what we saw, this was about, well, you know, we had a good day, a fun day doing all the cool stuff you do when you go camping. It was all new to us, and
Right.
we enjoyed ourselves. It was fun. And we had the little $10 Kmart tent and some blow-up air mattresses. And about 9 o'clock that evening, we'd burned some hot dogs, and you know, we had our air mattresses inflated, one on either side of the campfire, and a little campfire between us, and a tent in back of us. And we're just talking and chatting, and there came a lull in our conversation, and it got quiet. And I noticed that the tree frogs, the crickets, all the stuff in the forest that makes noise at night,
Right.
fell silent. And it really was, I thought it was spooky. It unnerved me. It didn't faze my friend, but it unnerved me. If I'd have been there by myself, I'd have been gone.
Right.
But I wasn't going to do that. I was going to be that guy. So I tried to put it out of my mind, and we carried on talking. And it's about 10, 15 minutes later, he's got his head turned to his left, and he's looking at something. And I'm about to ask him, hey, what are you looking at? When he asked me, hey, Terry, were those lights there before? And I didn't know of any lights. I mean, this was the middle of nowhere. You know, if you look at the satellite images now, there are some houses and things somewhat close by, but when we were there was nothing out there. And and when he said, were those lights there before? I couldn't see them because his torso was in the way, so I had to stand up and take a step back. And on the western horizon, there was a set of 3 little stars in a tight triangular pattern sitting right above the horizon. And they were too far above the horizon to have been lights from a train or a parking lot or something. They were definitely in the sky. And I thought maybe it was a plane that was headed right toward us, and we really couldn't perceive any motion until it would change course by a degree or two maybe. And just look stationary. But I couldn't think of any airplane that would have that triangular shaped light configuration.
Yeah.
So we're both kind of just puzzled, and we're looking at this thing, and then it rotates. It turned like it was on an axis. The 3 stars turned, and they turned to the right and rotated about 120 degrees and aligned the base of the triangle level with the horizon.
Wow.
Parallel with the horizon. And then as soon as it did that, it started to move up into the sky. Slowly at first, but it started to move up. As soon as it started to move up, that's when I felt this wave of calm wash over me. It was like mild sedation. You know, what we were seeing, our emotions were muted. I mean, we should have been scared or freaked out or even more curious than what we were. We were all almost kind of, I won't say apathetic, but almost disinterested. It really felt like I was an observer more than a participant. It was a weird emotion, but my friend must have been in the same frame of mind because, you know, there's no conversation between us. We're just watching this thing, and we're absolutely relaxed. And we watched it, and it climbed up into the sky. I think it hit a ceiling of about 10,000 feet. I'm guessing. I really had nothing to base that on other than my assumption. And when it hit 10,000 feet, it changed orientation to lying flat, parallel with the earth, and then dipped down and started a glide plane in toward us. I mean, we could tell by the apex of the triangle pointed directly at us that that's where it was headed. And as it's descending, it's getting larger, you know, and we could tell that it was a solid object because it would, as you go past a field of stars, they would blink out for a moment until it had passed. And it was crystal clear night with 1 trillion stars out, and the sky had kind of a dark blue glow to it. But the area inside this triangle was black. So we knew we were looking at a solid. It wasn't 3 objects moving in unison. It was 1 object. And as it slid down, it really was like gliding. We never heard a noise. It did this thing where it tumbled, and the point of the triangle dipped down, and then the back end came all the way around, and it did a complete somersault. And I don't know where this comes from, but I had the feeling that they were doing that for us, you know, that was, Yeah, that was their way of saying, look, this thing isn't out of control. We're in control of it. And I don't know where that feeling come from, but I had that feeling. And
Jerry, would you like me to show a picture, your drawing of what it looked like?
yeah, I think folks would like that. That
Okay.
drawing that was made in, I drew that just a few months after the incident. And if you look at the ground to the far left, you'll see some forest, and then you'll see my car, my 1966 Impala, and two figures and a tent. And I drew that to kind of give some kind of sense of size to this thing, because it was absolutely huge. It filled that entire meadow. And it was, as I described, a city block on each leg of the triangle.
Wow.
So it was enormous.
And how many, you said it was like 5 stories high?
It was, but we couldn't tell that at this point. At this point, all we could see was the underside of the thing. And
Okay.
so it cruised in at about 5,000 feet on the horizon, and then descended as it came across the floor or the tops of the trees. We could see the points of light dimmed somewhat, but it's still illuminated. So we had 3 like dim points of light on the treetops, and then this black shadow in between the points of the triangle. And it glided in and stopped. And again, totally silent, stopped at about 3,000 feet over our heads. That's an estimate, but I think it's going to be pretty close, 3,000 feet. So as I said, we could see the underside of the thing, but that was it at this point.
Right.
And as soon as it stopped, from underneath and in the center, it shot down a beam of light that was a white light. It had the quality of a searchlight cutting through fog, where you see a column of white light.
Sure.
But there was no fog. There was just this maybe 6 inches in diameter column of white light that landed in our campfire, and it just, like someone hit a switch, it turned on, and it stayed in the campfire for about maybe a minute, and then just again shuts off. And then there came a second light, and this was a laser, and I'd never seen lasers except on television. And this was about the diameter of a pencil, and it was a bluish purple in color, and it would land in one spot in our campsite for like a tenth of a second and then reappear in another spot. So in a second, it would dance around 10 different spots in the campsite. And I just, it struck me in the chest a couple times. It hit my buddy.
Wow.
It hit our tent, hit my car, hit his backpack, his Coleman cooler, the campfire. It kind of like hit everything that we brought, everything that wasn't, organic to the scene there, everything that we brought, including ourselves.
Wow.
And, like I said,
Did you feel anything when it hit you in the chest?
not a thing, not a thing.
It's an ominous light probing you, but you don't feel it. That is amazing.
Well, and that was the sense that I had was, hey, this thing's checking us out. It really is checking us out. It's scanning us.
Yep.
And
Wow.
again, there was no anxiety or fear of any kind. And we were in this sedated sense. I mean, I was, I really felt mildly sedated. And then as soon as that light turned off, that laser lasted about maybe 3 minutes. And as soon as that turned off, that feeling of calm sedation that I had transitioned to sleepy. And all I wanted to do was get my air mattress and go in that tent and go to sleep. And my friend beat me to it. He stood up and he said, "Show's over." And I think that's the first thing he said, since the thing started. And he went over and he threw his air mattress in the tent and fell on top of it. And I followed suit, threw mine in, and I didn't bother to take off my shirt or my boots or anything. And that'll come into play in just a bit. So I just fell on top of this air mattress and I was out. I mean, I was I don't think I was asleep. I think I was unconscious, and that's when they took us.
After you entered the tent is when they took you.
Correct. They took us out of the tent while we were there unconscious. Yeah.
So essentially, they anesthetized you, and then boom, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I was going to ask Carrie, was the beings that you saw the one that I put in your advertisement? This one?
Yes.
That's what you saw, that being right there.
That's a pretty good representation of the being that I saw on the ship. That drawing was made by a gentleman from England named Ronnie Kinsella. He and his brother Philip Kinsella are called they're twin brothers. You really cannot tell these two guys apart. But I think their show is called Twin Souls. I've been on their show a couple of times out of London.
Right.
So you probably heard of Philip Kinsella.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so that's Ronnie's drawing, based pretty much on my description. The only thing I would do differently is make the eyes just a little bit larger and all black. But that is the entity that I recalled seeing on the ship. I have some memories, clips of memories from being inside that thing. Now, I've never had a clear linear memory of what happened to us, but I have bits and pieces. And one of the things that I remember was this guy, and I'll tell you the context of it is that, well, I should go back to where I woke up. I woke up in the tent because there were these flashing lights that were just brilliant. Were lit up that tent like a ballpark at night for a millisecond. And they were white and yellow and maybe greenish. And they were the intensity of like an old school flash bulb from the 60s, one of those ones filled with filament on side. It goes off in your face. You see a blue dot every time you blink. They were that intense. And I wake up and I don't have my wits about me. And I'm thinking these are the overhead flashers of a park ranger's truck there to kick us out of the park is what I'm thinking. And while we didn't hear anything at all when this thing glided in and parked over the meadow, now I'm hearing this droning noise, and it sounds like a big piece of industrial machinery. If you've ever stood next to a diesel locomotive, maybe an idle,
Yes.
or something, you know that it's not auditory, that it's not loud with your ears, but you can feel the power in your chest.
Sure.
Like a bass speaker at a concert or something. And that's what this was like. So I'm thinking, like I said, I don't have my wits about me. I'm thinking, park ranger running a generator in the back of the truck, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I sat up, and when I did, I noticed that my boots had been unlaced almost all the way down. And I knew I didn't do that. I mean, I would have gone to sleep with my boots laced up, which is what I did, or would have taken them off all the way, but I wouldn't have gone to sleep with them like that as a trip hazard in case, for whatever reason, you needed to run.
Sure.
So that annoyed me. I wasn't scared at this point. I felt confused, but I didn't feel any fear. And I took my boots off, and my socks were on sideways. And I knew that I would never do that. And I put them on properly, put my boots back on, laced them up. And then I turned my attention to my friend who's on his knees, and he's peeking out of the tent. And I'm like, "What's out there, Toby? What is it?" "Toby, is it park rangers? What's out there, man?" And he didn't answer me. And I got to my knees, and I pulled back the flap on my side of the tent, and I looked out. And I saw that this thing that had been 3,000 feet over our heads when we went to sleep had descended, and it's now just 30 feet over the meadow. So
Wow.
we are off to the side of it, thankfully, but it's 30 feet above the meadow now. And that's how I was able to see the sides of it and get an idea of its depth. And as I said, it was 5 stories tall. It was as if somebody suspended a medical building or something out there. It was just crazy. And I wasn't really scared at that point either. And then walking around on the meadow, walking around were what I first took to be children, maybe a dozen, maybe 15. And I could see them kind of in silhouette. I could only see them fairly clearly whenever the lights on the triangles would flash. And they were flashing at odd intervals. And that confused me too. And I asked Toby, I said, man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night? And that's when he said to me, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Look at them. They're not human beings. Don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us. And as soon as he said that, my fear went from maybe a 10 to like 100. I mean, over the top. I was absolutely scared to death. And I think both of us were scared to death, afraid that we'd sneeze or cough or do something to draw their attention, and they'd maybe come over and visit us, and we didn't know they were long done with us by this point. So
wow.
We watched as this light came on from the center and underneath of this thing again. And this was a column of white light again, visible white light. And as soon as that clicked on, all these little guys turned their attention toward that light. And I could see them, but they were a fair distance away, but I could see that they were gray. I don't know if that's their natural skin tone or if that was a garment of some kind they wore. And they had a funny gait. They had a real distinctive walk. They walked like their knees were hinged to go backward, maybe an inch or two with each step. So it looked like they were dragging their feet behind them. It's strange. And the first two little guys stepped into this light. And within about 20 seconds, they just pixelated out and they were gone. And while we watched, they, in twos and threes, stepped into this light. And within 20, 30 seconds max, they would pixelate out and just be gone. Very much like the Star Trek thing, the old Star Trek thing.
Right.
And when the last two little guys were gone, that light shut off and that droning noise that we'd been hearing stopped. And it was, you know how you listen to something, it became like the bass line. We'd been hearing this noise for so long, we didn't notice it really until it went off. Mm-hmm. And then it was real silent. And we watched this thing take off, and it took off. It didn't take off like a rocket. It just lifted off like a hot air balloon and went straight up in the air. And we saw three lights, and then it gained speed as it gained altitude. And then there were just one light, and then finally it was gone. And I was scared to death. I didn't want to leave the tent. I told my friend, we had no idea what time it was. Both of our watches, we had nice mechanical wind-up watches that we kept synchronized because they were integral to our job of being EMTs. And both of those watches stopped at 240. Mine stopped at 240 in the nose. Toby stopped at 241. And those watches never worked again.
Wow.
I say they were mechanical wind-up watches. I wish I had saved my watch, but I didn't. By tracing it backwards, I know that we woke up about I'd say about an hour before sunrise, because we didn't wait that long in the tent for sunrise to happen. So,
right.
Wow.
Wow, that's a long time.
Like I say, it is, but like I said, I don't know how long we were up there. I woke up one morning and I couldn't bear weight on my right leg because my knee hurt. And I told my wife, I said, something's wrong with my leg. I got to go to the hospital. So I get all my medical care from the VA. So she took me to the VA emergency room, and I went in and they x-rayed my leg. And the lady that did the x-ray was like, and she did a couple more, and she shot like 3 sets of x-rays on my leg. And she asked me, she said, do you have a shrapnel wound or something that would account for a piece of body or a piece of metal in your body? And I said, no. I never left Missouri, never been in an auto accident, She wanted to know if I'd hurt my right leg in particular around the knee. And I'm like, no, never, skin knee as a kid. And she says, well, you have some anomalies on your x-rays. And I've asked the radiologist to come down and take a look. And I said, well, can I see them? They're my x-rays. And she's like, well, I'll leave that to the radiologist. That's his decision. So radiologist comes down, obviously ticked off that he'd been asked to come down. And he looks at these x-rays, and he looked at the one above my knee, and you can see there's a square structure with 2 wires attached to it. And he popped that up on the view box. And when he did, I could tell this is kind of zoomed in, but this is an area above my right knee and kind of lateral. And I recognized the spot. It was right above, or pardon me, right below a spot on my knee where when I used to run, that spot would go completely numb. And that was shocking to me. I was a runner. I started running in 1979, and I ran until I had a heart attack in 2005. And I didn't run marathons, but I'd run a couple miles. But I'd run almost every day. And every time I'd hit the 2-mile mark in my run, I mean, give or take 50 yards, the spot on my leg would go completely numb. And I took a safety pin with me one day. And at the end of my run, I could trace the outline of it. It was a perfect circle, about the size of a $50, and it was absolutely numb. And I asked my doctor about it, and she's like, well, does it interfere with your run? And I said, no, not really. And she's like, it sounds like a histemic reaction of some kind. She said, if it doesn't affect your run, I wouldn't worry about it. So I didn't.
Terry, is this the picture you're talking about right here?
That's the picture of the thing below my leg. The structure that you had on there before, the square structure, that's the one above my knee. That's the one that was directly underneath that spot that would go numb.
Okay.
But when I saw this particular x-ray, the one with the square structure, because the radiologist said that's absolutely a square man-made structure. Well, I can agree with half of that at least. I have a friend, a guy I went to law school with, works for the Bureau of Alcohol, well, worked, he just retired, worked for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And the BATF has the world's largest database on electrical devices. And the reason they have that is because in 1989, I think, the Lockerbie, Scotland bombing happened. Mm-hmm. And they traced that by retrieving radio parts, little capacitors, transistors, resistors, all kinds of stuff. And by being able to identify those parts, they were able to trace the radio by make and model back to Pakistan. So that's how they identified the Lockerbie, Scotland bomber. And wow. So they created this database that, like I say, has the world's largest, if it's made for electronics in the world, it's going to be in their database. And this thing in my leg is not in their database. So the thing below my leg, the radiologist pops up he popped that one up on the view box. And because before he popped it up, he said, you got some bones in your lower leg. And I was like, well, isn't that normal, or are I supposed to have? and he pops this up and he says, you have bones in the middle of your calf muscle. And he said, I've never seen bones spontaneously sprout in the middle of a calf or in the middle of any muscle, much less arrange themselves in a symmetrical pattern. He said, I've never seen this before. And he said, the thing above my knee, there has to be a scar because while the things below my knee, he thought were bone tissue, the thing above my knee was a manufactured artifact, and he said that would have had to left a scar. Somebody would have had to cut you and embed that in your skin, mm-hmm. and to get it at that depth, there's going to be a scar. And he said, you may not remember it. Maybe it happened. Sometimes we gain and lose weight, and those scars can migrate. I'm like, Doc, I've other than a skinned knee as a kid, I've never had an injury to that leg. And he insisted on looking. He thought he could prove me wrong, and he couldn't find a scar. There is no scar. And that visibly upset him. And I said, well, doctor, let me ask you, if I may, how often is it that you find a foreign object in the human body at this depth, of this size, and there not be a corresponding scar? And he says, never. He said, I've been a radiologist 23 years. And he said, violate the integrity of the skin and get something like this embedded in your skin, there's going to be a scar. He says, I have no way to tell how this thing got into your body. And then I knew. I mean, it validated, it affirmed that these things put their hands on me in 1977, at least.
That's
1977.
that square object is clearly an artificial structure embedded in your body. I mean, that the human body doesn't make anything naturally or otherwise to look anything like that. I mean, that's not a tumor. That's not a bone spur. That's nothing like that. That is defined edges. It's got wires. I mean, that is just amazing. It truly is.
Yeah, yeah. Body doesn't have right angles. You know?
What is this,
Right.
Terry? Terry, what is this picture?
That's a picture of my knee from straight on, looking front to back. And if you look, you see that on the right side as you're looking at it, and right below the knee joint, you see that little line of objects. See those there?
Yeah, on the right. Correct.
That is that floret pattern that you see when you look at it sideways.
Ah, okay.
Oh, this one. Okay,
I
gotcha.
see.
And this one right here is the
That-
side of the square?
Yes, that is a different animal altogether. I'll tell you what happened was I was warned in October of 2017 as I was writing my book. I had trouble. I couldn't get a surgeon to take these things out of my leg. I just wanted the thing out of the top of my leg. I couldn't get a surgeon to agree to touch the things in the bottom of my leg because they were natural bone, and they wouldn't do that. But the thing above my knee, surgeons were like, "Cool, yeah, I'd like to remove that." And I wanted it out of my leg. But I told them I wanted it removed under a forensic protocol. I wanted to go, like they were removing a bullet for,
Investigation.
investigation, right? So following a forensic protocol where they have a chain of custody established, it passes from his hand to my hand or my agent's hand, whoever I designate if I'm, knocked out. And the surgeons were like, "Fine, go get a cardiac clearance letter because you've had a couple heart attacks, and we need a cardiologist to certify that you're good for the surgery." And I couldn't get a cardiologist to do that. And the reason they explained is, well, first of all, the VA cardiologist said, "Look, I got 50,000 vets out there with iron in their body from Iraq or Korea, and they want it out yesterday too. But the standard of care in this country is if it's not causing a problem, it's a risk-benefit analysis. Is the benefit of taking it out, if it's not bothering you, is that worth the risk of an infection or a reaction to the anesthesia or any number of things that could go wrong surgically?" And the answer is no, at least not in this country. So I found a radiologist down in Tijuana who was going to remove it for me. It was, they don't follow standard care in the United States.
Sure.
Right.
And I was going to do that in December of 2017. And right before I published the book, because I wanted to have it in my hand, that was going to be part of my book. And I'm going to cut this a little bit short, but I had an entity in my house, third week in October 2017. I woke up sitting bolt upright in my living room, and there was what I took to be a petite Asian woman sitting directly across from me. And I know this sounds tough to believe, but I'm telling you, this is what happened. And she spoke to me telepathically, and I had that same sedated feeling that I had back in 1977. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't freaked out. I wasn't ready to get a gun. She sat across from me in a non-threatening posture, and I didn't feel threatened by her. And my first thought, I didn't say anything audibly, my first thought was, "Are you here about this thing in my leg?" And I heard her audibly in my head. With crystal clarity, I heard her voice, a female voice, say, "Yes, that's right." And she told me that I should not have it removed, that it can't fall into the hands of terrestrial scientists, and that if I had it removed or made plans to have it removed, that her hosts, HOSTS, would remove it in the middle of the night while I'm asleep. the word host bugged me because it could mean so many things. I mean, it could be a noun, it could be a verb, you could host a dinner party,
Right.
you could symbiotic, parasitic relationship. There's a host. So I'm like, who are your hosts? What is a host? And she says, you call them aliens. I call them my hosts. They're not alien to me. And I thought, well, that's kind of poetic almost. And she told me that she was a hybrid. And that was her warning. And on November 17th, about 2.5 weeks later, I woke up and I had terrible pain in my upper legs. I had these deep puncture wounds. They eventually bruised and had a really kind of a flower pattern, like bruise pattern to them. Those are on my terrylovelace.com page. You can see top of my leg with these bruises. There's a puncture wound in the middle that was real deep, but it didn't bleed. And I woke up in pain, and I told my wife, I said, they came in and got this thing out of my leg last night. And she said, well, you got to go get an x-ray, go find out. And I'm like, boy, where am I going to get an x-ray? Because you can't just walk in and order one.
Sure.
So I thought I'll go to a chiropractor. It's a chiropractor's office not far from us. So, and I know those guys look at 100 x-rays a week. So I took copies of my x-rays on paper with me. And I went, I didn't have an appointment. They were busy and I waited. This was November 17th, 2017. I waited to see the guy. And he finally calls me back and says, okay, where do you hurt? And I pulled my pants down in the exam room and showed him these puncture wounds. And he's like, man, those are really weird. How did you get those? I'm like, Doc, I don't know. I woke up with them. And he said, well, were you in some kind of accident? And I said, no, Doc, you're busy. So I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. You see, in 1977, while I was on active duty in the United States Air Force, I think I was abducted from a campground. And I think that I had an implant in my leg. And I think they came and took the thing out. And I'm here to see if you could x-ray my leg for me and confirm that. And he's like, all right, then. And I pull up my pants, and he has me by the elbow, and he's escorting me toward the front door because he thinks I'm crazy. But I know these guys look at 100 x-rays a week. So I held up those pieces of paper showing these things. And about 3 feet from the door, he stopped. And he took the pieces of paper and he said, follow me. And I went back to his office. We went in his office and he shut the door and locked it. And his phone's ringing and people were knocking at the door. And I sat down in front of his desk and he put the pieces of paper in front of me and said, tell me about these. Give me the capsule version. And I said, well, Doc, pretty much what I said. And he said, okay. He says, I don't have x-ray equipment here. He says, we use a freestanding radiology clinic just down the road. It's about a mile away. I'll write a prescription for you to have the x-ray. I'll pay for your x-ray.
Wow.
But you promised me you won't use my name or the name of my clinic in your book. And I've honored that. So I went down and I got an x-ray. And I went out to my car and they gave them to me. They gave the films to me. And I put them up. It was a sunny day. I put them up and I could see that the thing above my knee was gone.
Wow.
And I had really conflicted emotions about that. I mean, in a way, it was like, boy, I'm glad it's out. But in a way, for some reason, I felt depressed. And I don't understand that emotion. But I dropped the x-rays off at his office. And by the way, the things below my leg are still there. They're untouched. I dropped the x-rays off at his office, and he showed them to me. He called me up on the phone, and he said, did you know that they may have taken that artifact out above your knee, but did you see that they left something in your leg? And I'm like, no, I didn't see that. I don't know where to look. So I went down to his office, and he showed me. And he said there are two wires, they're parallel, close together. On the black and white image in my book, it just looks like a white line. But if you hold the x-ray film up to a light source, you can see they are two distinct little wires lying next to one another. And I said, Doc, if these things are so far above us, evolutionary, they're so more intelligent than we are, how could they be so inept as to leave these wires in my leg? And he said, you don't get it. They don't do anything by accident. He said, These two little wires in your leg are probably an upgrade. They probably gave you the 2017 model of the 1977 model they took out.
Wow.
And, if you think about it, that kind of makes sense. I look how
Sure.
much our technology has advanced since 1977.
Absolutely.
So I feel like I'm still tracked. I've got those two little wires next to my femur. I'm not going to have them removed because they'd have to cut real deep into tissue into my thigh to get them out. And I'm just not going to have that done. I'm going to let them lay.